Hey everyone! It's been said that every quilt tells a story, and it's so true. But I also believe every quilter has a story to tell. I wanted to hear about the people behind these wonderful quilts and thought you'd enjoy hearing about their lives also. Welcome to A Quilter's Life. Marla Knoch Work owns the Quilted Work, a quilt shop just outside of Marietta, Ohio. It sits in a country setting not far off of I-77 in southeast Ohio. Walking into her shop, I felt right at home. The wonderful choices of fabric welcome you in. If you're anywhere near the Quilted Work, stop in. It will be well worth the trip. Thank you for being with me on A Quilter's Life, Marla.
It's nice to be with you, Paula.
Let's start with, where were you born and raised?
Well, I'm a native Washington County, Ohio girl, and I was born in Marietta, lived in a little farming village out of Marietta, about 7 miles, called Stanleyville. It was a German-settled area, and I'm the 5th generation of those people that settled out in that territory. And I eventually grew up, went to college, and did the line of average normal things, married, 2 boys, a dog, the normal things that you hear about. And we built a house in the pasture field off the farm that I was raised on. So I've went away and come back, and I'm born, bred, and raised here in the Ohio Valley.
Wow. You mentioned you went to college?
Went here to Marietta. I graduated with a music education degree and a minor in child psychology. I worked in a body shop in the office for 12 years and just did a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Played piano and organ for 20 years for churches, and then kind of settled into taking care of the parents mode, which we all find ourselves frequently in, and took care of my mother, my dad, and my aunt for 12 years. And it was during that time that I did some transitioning and decided to sew, because I had been a tom girl up to that point pretty well, and there was a lot of quilting in my family, and I had done some computer work, enjoyed computers, and the evolution of a long arm was during that period in the 90s. And I followed it on each videotape that I could get from a company to look over and dream and dream and dream like we all do about different things in life. And when it came 2005 and I had the opportunity to buy a long arm, I put it in my boys' room, because I had gotten rid of, the boys had grown up. And I took over their bedroom and had my long arm, which was 14 feet long, which filled the room to a T. We put it in the room through a window, and we took it out of a window and eventually built the quilt house thereafter. So it's been a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and an evolutionary evolvement. And instead of a hobby, some people like to camp or travel. I just like to meet people and like quilters and enjoy the long arm quilting myself. And my husband said to me when we added on to our quilt house for a classroom, he said, well, do you plan on working forever? And I said, well, what else am I going to do? So I get up in the morning and come over and take my pills like every other 68-year-old, and shots and whatever medicines you have to take, go through the routine and start in either quilting, piecing, or getting ready for people to come to the shop for classes. And then at 7 o'clock at night, I go over and hubby and I watch TV, and he has his gardens in the works, which he has almost 2,000 varieties of daylilies, so that keeps him busy, and his sports, and I have my quilting and my little playhouse. So that's kind of the scope of my life in a nutshell for right now anyways.
Yeah. Now you mentioned your quilt shop, but can you tell us the name of your quilt shop?
the Quilted Work. Our last name is Work, so wasn't it just unique to say the Quilted Work?
Yeah.
And hubby's gardens is Gardens in the Works with a plural on it. A friend gave it to us because they said in gardens you're always working, and it's true. He is now getting ready for winter, still trying to fight the weeds of the summer rains that we've had and getting mulch down. So yes, work is in both our family small businesses that we have.
All right. Besides quilting, what other crafts do you do?
I don't have any time for anything else.
At this point.
Yes, it's. I have quite a list of quilts that keeps me busy. Between that and running the quilt shop, and maintaining classes and setting up schedules, and being a wife and a grandmother to 5 children, it keeps you pretty well hopping. I just broke down and bought a Brother Luminaire, which is one of these sewing machines that I kiddingly say change diapers, but they just about do everything for you. They have a computer and can scan in pictures and then change it even into embroidery. And it's my reward, you might say. If I have a good day at work here at the shop, then I am allowed to sit down at my toy and play. I can't sit there first until my work's done.
Yeah.
So it's kind of keeps me in line. And this morning I sat down and had a great time, and all I did was clean up and put threads away and straighten up the area. But as a sewer would understand that.
Yes, definitely.
So she's ready for the next round anyways.
So who introduced you to quilting?
Well, it was kind of a gradual thing. It wasn't any one particular person. I have women in my family that were all perfectionist sewers, and an aunt that was the head of the extension for the state of West Virginia and wrote the pamphlets for how to make collars and coats and suits and that sort of thing. So sewing was secondhand, and I learned on a featherweight how to make a potholder probably when I was 6 or 7. But it was always a hassle between my mother, my grandmother, and my aunt to try to keep me inside. I was running outside and either playing with the pigs or the cattle or the dog or the pony or something or another outside. I didn't want to sit still, and with 2 Martha Stewarts, it was a little bit challenging. But I did have to take sewing when I was in 4-H, because if you wanted to take an animal project, you had to either take sewing or cooking. So I did learn to make the original tea towel, of course, and apron, and then made a jumper and different things for sewing, and learned that along life. But quilting didn't really take form until I was probably in my 50s, and I had seen Eleanor Burns and Georgia Bonesteel on PBS and thought I'd give it a try. And I always liked to play with graph paper and was always building businesses, either dog kennels or veterinary hospitals. I think I was a frustrated architect, if the truth be known, because I wrote and did the plans on graph paper for our home, and I did the plans for the quilt shop and the addition, and it seems like I've always got my fingers in something that is being built. And maybe that's the carryover into the quilting. When you get a quilt top, you are building a final product and creating something, and maybe that's just something that's there that I feel a need to fill, and that's the way I fill it. So anyways, I took a piece of graph paper and I started out. Of course, we never start with an easy project. I picked a Hunter Star and decided to fill in the colors, and you can get about 5 different patterns going in a Hunter Star if you watch what you're doing. So I made mine out of red and gold and accomplished that. But I also learned that cotton is a good fabric to do quilts in. I put the border in a gold lame, and gold lame frays easily and is not easy to sew with. So as a beginner sewer, I learned some of the things that we take too big of a project to start out with instead of maybe just a small block to get a taste of it. And it was all right piecing, but I really liked the quilting part where you could figure out designs and put patterns upon a pattern upon a pattern. And I think that was where the draw to quilting came. And I was probably one of the very few people there's probably now to date close to 4,000, if I understand it right, Statler, that's computer aided long arm, where the computer is with the long arm, in the world, and mine was number 39 when they started out putting the computers on it. And I've had it upgraded since then, but the idea that you could take a pattern and you could take that pattern and skew it and twist it and turn it and flip it and rotate it to fit an area was very fascinating to me. So one thing led to another, and then I fell into the long arm business. And with the long arm business, if you have long arms, you have fabric. So then I decided, well, I'll have a little fabric along the line while I have my long arm. Well, any sewer knows there's no such thing as a little fabric. And I tended toward the brights, so I ended up having brights. And then I started to have wide backs, and that seemed to be a draw for my little quilt house, because a lot of quilt shops will only carry maybe less than 5 bolts, and I have over 200. So I have people that come to here specifically because of the variety and types of wide backs that they can get here, from 108 inches wide clear up to 118 inches wide. So the piece is in one piece on the back, and they're not sewing 2 pieces together and creating a seam in the back. It just makes a stronger quilt. And when they first came out with wide backs, the material was not that great a quality. Now they've improved it to a great extent, and I get some of my materials from British Columbia. Some of them are from Vancouver, and then there's the United States distributors as well. But we have, with our fabric, as people realize, the price has risen over the last 15 years from where we started out at selling at retail for $6 a yard. Now we're running up to $14 a yard. And of course, anything would increase with inflation, but the seemingly big problem is we grow the cotton in the United States, but we do not have the mills to process it into fabric due to the high cost of labor. So therefore, it is exported. Well, when it is exported, it gets taxed, and it goes to Pakistan, China, and India, and various places in the world that have less labor costs. Then when it comes back, printed and milled and on these huge bolts to sell to us, it gets imported and it's taxed again. So we have that in there, plus you have your middleman, and fabric's just higher. There are places on the internet that people do buy fabric, but you run the chance of the picture's not always true to the color, and we as quilters, many of us like to feel the fabric, because you can vary from fabric that's woven very loosely with like 65 threads per square inch to material that is 74 that I'm aware of, and I'm sure there's even higher grades, threads per square inch, and I try to go on the higher end, and you can tell when you feel your fabric whether it has body or whether it is thin and has been over dyed or starched. So there's a wide variety of fabrics out there for quilters to use, from the budget, from the garage sale person that goes to garage sale and finds somebody's old stash, to whether you go in a store and you go, well, I'm only making 3 quilts, I want to pick a designer series and I want a certain selection of fabrics that are all coordinated for me, and I'm willing to pay the price because this is my la-di-da-da, so, or whatever that you're handing down, a special piece maybe to your family. And that kind of hits the ends of the different fabrics. Quilting has a lot of aspects that I have run across in my life. With my degree in psychology, we as quilters talk a lot, so we're very therapeutic to each other. Classes are not always brain surgery. Sometimes they're just a social event. There are different types of quilters. There's different type of people that come to classes. Some people are very technical oriented, and that's what they take the class for. Others, they just want to meet other fellow quilters and share ideas and enjoy the outing for the day. When you come to buyers, you run into the same thing. You have people that they'll only buy the remnants and what's maybe 4 years old. They don't care. That's where their pocketbook is, and that's what they want to buy. And then you have the other buyer that wants this year's fresh print right off that nobody else has. So you've to try to keep a midstream of people happy. And you can't keep everybody happy, but you try. And I've enjoyed my quilters, and it always amazes me. As a quilter, you are in a way isolated in some aspects, but when there are gatherings, there's a lot of talking that goes on. You realize that similar things that happen in your family, that you think you have the most bizarre family in the entire world, someone else has the same thing happening, or something very similar, or you aren't alone in your kids snapping at you once or twice in your life. So there's healing that happens by meeting other quilters as well. My children look at it like, well, it's just something to keep mommy occupied and out of trouble and out of politics. So I have had reunions here and met with many of my classmates, and now that I'm 68, I actually can say I've been out of high school 50 years, which just seems like you're archaic when you say that. And when we met, we were just amazed how our lives had crossed in different avenues, maybe in different parts of the world, but similar circumstances. Teachers, and whether they taught in Paris or went to Denmark, or whether it was at Marietta or Warren, or it's just amazing how paths, we think we have such a unique life, and we run at such a heavy pace to a lot of different things, but some of the basics are still some of the basics.
Right.
I sound like an old philosopher, don't I?
Oh, do you have a favorite quilt that you've done?
Oh, I love that when people ask me that, because I just love to say, oh yeah, the one that I'm working on right now. Because each one, you hear people say each one has a story, but they really do have a story. I have one that is on the frame now. The individual is in hospice, and somebody that I had known all my life didn't realize the individual was in hospice. The lady that's taking care of it made the quilt for the individual. So I called my other quilters and said, can you hold while I put this one on for right now? And they had no problem. And I'm rushing to get it through in the next 3 days so that this individual can have it. And when they realized that I was the quilter, they had known me when I was 8 years old. So to think that something like this, and this person's like 93, 94, life has changed, and yet our paths had crossed. And I feel so honored to be able to do this for this individual who is a friend of the family. It's just, you have opportunities to touch people's lives that you would have never had in any other way, shape, or form. And those become the memorable ones that you remember of, that if a quilt affects somebody, to not saying everybody comes here and starts bawling, but if they're emotionally struck with it, that it brings tears to their eyes, you've struck an emotion. And to me, I think that is one of God's greatest gifts to us, that we can do that to someone else, or someone else can do that to us, that we can have that human connection. That it's, my dad used to have a saying that you can lose everything in life except your education. Well, I think the emotional bond that we have with people might be the other thing that you can't lose. But it is special. And you remember those particular quilts. And I've quilted now for, I have to always stop and count and recalculate and all that sort of thing, but I think it's close to 14 years. And it amazes me, every now and then Facebook will pop up something that you had put up and I had forgotten all about that quilt, and I'll see that quilt and I'll go, oh yeah, that was such and such who went to such and such who did it for such and such. And I remember one lady that I thought an awful lot of. She had a friend that had cancer terminally and was a sewer, and the lady had bought some gold, silver, and black material and left it to this friend, and she made a quilt. And I thought, what a neat thing that she did when she was alive, and her friend remembered her made the quilt and remembered her long after she was gone, and it was a special bond that they had together. And those are neat experiences in life. One of those, what do we call, God things, maybe?
Yeah. So besides your long arm, because we know that's way up there on the list, but do you have a favorite tool?
Oh, geez. That really is hard to say. I like gadgets. Anybody that knows me, my boys, I have 2 boys, and they tease me because I have a large kitchen in my home. But since I live my life most of the time over here, I use this little mini kitchen for hubby and I, since it's just he and I, to fix our meals. And they say, one more gadget, Mom, one more. I like the air fryer. That's a kick. I like a food processor. I like these little grills. Those are the kitchen gadgets, and they're always teasing me about them. When it comes to my long arm, there's all kinds of rulers, and mainly it's the software is the big gadget on it. And my new sewing machine, it's probably my newest gadget. It will quilt small things in a large embroidery hoop that's, I think, 14 by 16. It's a very large hoop, and they talk about people that don't have long arms putting things on there and continually quilting on it. And you could take pictures, send it as a JPEG to your computer, put it in this program, which makes it an embroidery PES file, and load it onto the sewing machine, and it will embroider it out. Now, to me, that is just wild, wild, wild sort of thing. And if I had a lot of time, I would probably be doing a lot of digital type embroidery where it comes out and it kind of looks like somebody that has done cross stitch or needlepoint. It's evolved where it's that detailed, and the different colors that they have in thread now is so vast that they can do all kinds of shading that you just can't even begin to imagine. I carry an embroidery line of thread, and it alone has 375 colors, and that's just a small segment of what people can do now with these machines. So I have a serger. Yeah, I like my serger. My brother loves guns and is a gun expert, muzzle loaders, you name it. He always teases me, well, what new sewing machine did you buy? And I'll say, what new gun did you buy? So I love a serger, and I love the embroidery machine, and I like my long arm, and that's probably more than my pocketbook really should hold.
Let's go on to, what was your worst quilting experience?
I do have one worst quilting experience. It was my very first experience when I decided that I was going to take on and do a customer quilt. A lady called me, and I don't even know how she got my name, but she came over with 5 quilts that her mother-in-law had pieced, and her mother-in-law was deceased, and she wanted to do these quilts for her grandchildren. And one of them her husband wanted to keep because it was his mom that had pieced them. And I had my long arm in my home, in my boys' room, and I had something on the long arm at the time. But anyways, we were opening her quilts and shaking them out like you would a sheet and laying them down. And we would look through each quilt and try to decide what kind of general design, what this person was, and how we were going to quilt it. And on the 4th quilt, it was a blue quilt, and I can't even remember now exactly what the pattern was on it, but there was some empty blocks, and it was to go to her son, who was a coach. And so we decided we would put things like baseball and football and the different sports that he coached on it. And when I picked the quilt up from the frame and went to pull it up like you would a sheet, and how you pick it up quick, it caught on a straight pin, and it went rip. And I don't know what a knife would feel like to your stomach, but I felt like if the earth could have sucked me in, I wanted to go into the ground. I mean, what do you say to somebody? You rip somebody's quilt. And the lady was such a sweet lady. She came over, put her arm around me, and she said, "Honey, it's just a quilt. We'll get it fixed. Don't worry about it." And I thought, you talk about Christian people, I tell you, that was the most consoling thing she could have ever said to me. And I said, "Well, we'll figure out something." Well, now all these quilts were made years ago. It wasn't like I was going to find the material to match it to fix it whatsoever. And I had an L-shape rip in this quilt. So I do believe in God, and I do believe in prayer, even silly things. And I'd go to bed, and during the day I'd be thinking, what can I do? What can I do? And on the third day, yeah, I know that's freaky that it's the third day, but it was the third day, it came to me, why don't I take the material, because the material was there, it was just that there was an L rip, and do in a satin stitch and make a field goal out of it, and we'll put a football across it. And I had read that if you make a mistake, make it more than once, and then it looks like it's a design thing. Well, needless to say, I didn't rip the lady's blocks in other places, but I did make field goals, and we put footballs over it, and when I quilted the quilt, you couldn't tell where the rip was, and everything was great. That lady has been a continual customer to this day. I've just finished some quilts for about 6 months ago, and so that was a friendship born out of a disaster. And I think it was my worst and one of my best things that happened. But what a story, and one of those, quote, had to be a God thing. That's all there was to it. So that was probably one of my worst events.
So when you think about it, why do you want to make quilts?
I don't think I even think about that I have a particular thing that says you should make quilts because such and such and such and such. It's something that I draw happiness from. I've always wanted to have a business. This kind of fell into my lap as anything ever falls in your lap. Just one thing kind of led to the next. I get a lot of satisfaction out of it. And it's what is it they say? If you find something that you can do and you enjoy it, it's not work. When I get up in the morning, it's not like, oh gee, I gotta go to the office today, or I gotta do this. I enjoy getting up. The first thing I think of is, what can I eat? Is my blood sugar going to be low enough so I can have a treat in the morning? And then I decide whether I'm going to straighten bolts or prepare classes or pay bills or pay the taxes or the utilities or do quilting for someone, what the day follows. And at the end of the day, I count a successful day if I have accomplished something. And it often amazes me, if I had set out and said I had to do this, and this, I would have been so exhausted and would never have made it. And it amazes me what can be accomplished and what fun things can happen in a day's time that you didn't really plan on. So some people have hobbies, and their hobbies take a short period in their life, and they do reading, and they do cooking, and they do traveling, and they do volunteer work and a lot of other things of that sort. Well, with my quilting, all those things seem to get incorporated here. I do charity quilts here, that's my type of volunteer, or I'll do cooking here for the family because I'm in this building. I have 2 little dogs that are my anxiety relievers and welcomers. They're little French bulldogs, and I had a grand opening here, and I put the dogs with my husband so that they wouldn't be underneath foot with all the people. And I had 4 people say, well, where are the dogs? Where's Lucy? Where's Ittybit? We came to see the dogs, not you. So they have their own fan clubs. And I have enjoyed this, and I am 68, and the good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, which it does from time to time. We don't get water in the quilt shop. It gets around us, and I can be the water weather person here looking out my window. I hope to continue this on for another 20 years. None of us know what our health has or what happens in our life with our spouses or our children. And we just take each day as it comes, and I'm thrilled to make new friends and new people along the way. So I guess there's a lot of little things that come into it, not any one thing that says, this is why I'm a quilter today.
Okay. Do you have any tips for me today?
Oh, do I have any tips? Well, my brother taught me something when I was very small, because he's 10 years older than I am. I'm sure he doesn't want that known, but he is. And I would follow him around as his rug rat, and he taught me how to shoot a gun when I was like 7 or 8 years old. So he was always my idol, and I was jibber jabber and have always been able to talk. And he said, remember something, if your mouth's open, you can't hear anything. And I tend to talk too much. And if there's one thing that I could listen more and talk less, if I could do that, that would be a great help to me. I'd say that's probably one of my weaknesses. I talk a lot because some people can think ahead and then they talk. I talk as my brain works. So I don't censor things the way I should sometimes, or I don't speak in full sentences because it's in thought patterns. And I do a lot of interrupting because really you need to be honored if I interrupt you, because what it means is I'm following your train of thought and my brain's working and a thought has come through, and if I don't say it, I'm afraid I'm going to forget it. So I'm a really bad interrupter. But listening to people, I've learned a lot. And even when you think you know what they're going to say, let them say what it is, because there may be something they need to hear said. And you might be surprised, you might just learn something, that you get something from learning from others other than just being the quote teacher all the time.
This would probably dovetail into if you want to talk about taking the classes.
I have classes, and I offer classes anywhere from what I call the no-brainers. I'm having a reading pillow class, which is a pillow in a 14 or 16 inch, how you buy a pillow form, and then you cover it and you make a pocket so you can put a book in it. Children nowadays, especially here in the Marietta area, are required from what I've been told, the 2nd grade on up to the 7th, to read so many minutes per night, depending on their grade level. From 5, I have a 4th grade grandson, and he's 20 minutes each night, and he's reading these I Survive books. And these pillows are great because they could stick their book in there and have it on their bed. And I have just seen on Facebook where one lady made these books, and she put an actual handle on the pillow so they could carry it from the living room or wherever around or whatever to different places. But this is a great grandma, quote, grandma, or mommy gift at Christmas time. It doesn't take a lot of material. On the front, if you're lucky enough to have an embroidery machine, you could embroider something on it, or you could just write with plain old Sharpie if you wanted to, put the child's name and put their favorite material like dinosaurs or solar system or fairies or whatever on the back. Anyways, we're going to do that October 1st and October the 5th. And I have other classes that we do, like tote bags and the famous jelly roll rugs that have been around that people seem to be excited about. I've had people say, oh, I don't want to walk on my pretty fabric. Well, you can put it as a table topper, placemats, table runner. There's other different uses for the same technique. I would like to do a backpack class that there is a pattern out by ANNIE Designs that's very elaborate, and the backpack would be the equivalent to, if you went and bought one, probably a $75 backpack. Has like 5 different departments in it, and netting and zippers and the whole 9 yards. If I could get enough interested in it. Now that one to me would be brain surgery. You'd have to pay attention to what you were doing on that one. But most of my classes are just a matter of doing something simple in a one-time stay so that you finish the project, whether it's a table runner or the reading pillow or a tote, that you can go home and take what you've learned and not finish the class, but know what you're doing, that you can make 10 of them for gifts or whatever you want. That's my purpose. And I am open to any class suggestions from people too, because that's where I get my greatest ideas from my customers. Things that they have done and enjoyed and felt were nice gifts, from what they call weighted blankets for children that have, or people that have restless leg syndrome, to the reading pillows, to even those where you rice bags that you put in your microwave to heat for things for your neck. There's health things that you can make, and bibs, and there's more charities than I could begin to list. I've often said I'm going to make a list of different charities at my thread table where people check out, because in this area it started out years and years ago. It was the Linus blankets that you first sort of heard about, and then there's just blankets for Eve Shelter, there's blankets for the dogs and the cats, and Cancer Society, and I'm going to leave out somebody somewhere somehow, but there is some organization or something. When I was growing up as a child and the ladies had their quilting bees, yes, I actually remember seeing my grandmother do an actual quilting bee. The ladies would make quilts, and I don't know who took charge of the quilts, but the idea was if there was a fire in the village, that they would have a quilt for that family. And the fire department did that for a while here too. And then I've heard of people making blankets for the sheriff's department, so that if there was an accident, that they had a blanket to put around somebody in a tragic situation, which is nice. So your imagination can be your guide. There's almost everybody that likes to have the comfort of a hug and something warm wrapped around them. And that's what a good quilt does.
It sure does. Well, thank you for visiting with me. I really enjoyed our chat.
It was fun, Paula. It really was. Ask me to talk anytime.
Okay, I will. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of A Quilter's Life. You can find more stories on aquilterslife.com or subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts so each episode will be downloaded automatically. Thanks for listening.